Welcome back, Critical Gamers. I recently published an article series explaining in detail a new theory I have on the gaming industry. I call this theory the Trigon theory of video games. Trigon. There's nothing wrong with viewing games as art, technology, or as a business. However, these three views, when put together, create some odd overlapping results and a range of subtle side effects.
Video games cannot separate easily from the views of Twitch to understand gameplay. You often may initially seem like gamers make decisions on what they feel, then find what you want based on what you're willing to pay for.
I clearly support the view of games as art, but I understand that there is much to appreciate from the other views. Also, I understand that blending these views can result in more varied, more interesting, and stronger products overall. Yes, many products that we call games these days aren't much of games at all. But instead of getting tangled up in the terms, I suggest going straight to the heart of the matter by asking what views you hold and how these views affect everything you think and love about video games. Understanding which view you hold is important for understanding yourself, communicating to others, and supporting the video game industry. And if you're unsatisfied with the games you play, consider if a more well-grounded viewpoint could work for you. Chances are, you're neglecting the games as art view. Welcome to the digital B-side to Critical Cast Episode 3 Trigon. This is a space that's open to your input as I extend the conversation from the main episodes of Critical Casts. I am your host, Richard Terrell, otherwise known as KirbyKid. First up is a dual interview segment. I simply didn't have room for this content in the main episode, so I'm using these interviews as an introduction to the group discussion that follows. I edited this interview to juxtapose and highlight contrasting views of what games are. Pay close attention to their differences and see if you can spot the common terms and keywords that reveal what views of games my guests hold.
Can you hear me okay? How's it sound?
This is Matt Fairchild.
My name is Matt Fairchild, and I'm lead community manager for TinyCo. We make iPhone and Android games, and the focus is largely on mobile social games at the moment.
Tiny Pets from TinyCo.
Our top titles are Tiny Village, Tiny Monsters, Tiny Castle, and Tiny Zoo. And my background before the mobile social industry was in competitive gaming, and in particular competitive Super Smash Bros.
Oh yeah, Matt and I have been rivals sort of in competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee since 2003. I think he even beat me at a Most 2 tournament, one of the biggest tournaments we held in Texas. So this guy is definitely a gamer. But what I really wanted Matt to talk about was being the halfway point between community commentary and developer insight.
I would love to dive into that. That's actually something that I spend a significant amount of time thinking about at work, because my ability to do my job effectively requires being able to translate what players say for developers. Like, in theory, we all speak the same language, but a developer or a designer or a programmer or an artist all comes at a problem very differently than somebody that is actually consuming the game does. And so that translation becomes hugely important. Our team is designed to act as a conduit between players and developers, and that's meant to go both ways, where players often view the company as this big dark bastion, like this black box that nobody can see into. And at the same time, developers, when you're on the other side of the curtain, it can be hard to remember that there are real people playing your products. And so stuff gets lost in translation all the time.
And our second speaker is somebody who I met through my blog discussing game design, and...
Hello? Can you hear me? Hey, cool.
His name is Alex.
I'm Alex Joe Snyder, also known as Axe Joe online. I guess I've been making Flash games kind of as side projects for several years now. I think my most popular one has been The Love Letter, which is just a little 5-minute game that I made with a friend of mine, Pat Kemp, who's an artist and game designer. My other games, I think, they were like every time I released a game, it was like, oh no, I didn't realize that was important. Darn, okay, I guess I'll try again on the next game. And with The Love Letter, the scope was so small, and I was working with such a good collaborator. We just were able to pull it off. That's kind of my Flash experience, but I've been working as a casual game programmer for the past 2 years or so, and then I just started working at Linden Lab, which is a company that makes Second Life.
Now moving on to the topic of what players want versus what players need.
The really fascinating part to me is that intersection where player feedback can actually be risky for a company, even when the company acts on it. Because players, there's a lot of times that player feedback indicates a desire for the game, and the solution for that desire can be entirely different from what you or I tell the company, hey, I really want this. And if you think of an example being cheat codes, where cheat codes in a game are really, really fun for a short amount of time. And I remember once I was playing a game called Ikaruga for the GameCube, and I loved this game, and I kept on playing it over and over and over again, but I was also terrible at it. And while I was playing with my roommate, we discovered by sheer accident, I'm sure we could find how we accidentally did it on Google somewhere, but through some random combination of button presses, we got infinite credits. And we thought, this is great. We get to see the final level, finally. This is going to be so awesome. And so we played through the entire game in one sitting with those infinite credits and thought, well, that was a thing. And then we never played it again. And that was after I had spent several months up until that point trying to crack that nut. And as soon as we had the cheat codes, it was fun for this very short period, and then it just evaporated.
Now consider what developers want and where the inspiration to create these video games comes from in the first place.
So Fly Drill is a game that I made, I guess it was a few years ago now, and it was based on a dream that I had, where I was this little flying creature, and I was going through this maze, and I could drill through the walls, and I was trying to kind of get out of the maze, and there were enemies that were like little swarming dots chasing me, and I could try and run away from them, but I could also get them to crash into each other, to destroy each other without actually being able to attack them myself. And so I tried making that into a game, and I ended up making something that was very similar and to me felt like it captured the feeling of the dream.
And as we know, just having a dream or the inspiration is not enough. Because video games are a heavily designed and crafted art form, we have to, as designers, match up our inspiration and our drive and our dreams with a particular kind of medium, with particular kinds of limitations in order to achieve the best results.
There are a lot of forces at work on gaming right now, including the much more thriving indie scene. If you see that Temple Run 2 released today, and Temple Run 1 is a fantastic success story, and it's also something that really couldn't have existed on the scale that it does before mobile phones. The game itself could have existed. I was actually thinking today when I saw the Temple Run 2 announcement, wasn't that a launch title for the Wii? What was that game called again? The Sonic game that you held the Wii controller?
Sonic and the Secret Rings.
Yeah, that game is Temple Run. And we lit into it when it first came out because we're like, it's a Sonic on rails, and you just go through it, and you have this kind of minimal control scheme. And it's very, the only difference between that game and Temple Run is that Temple Run is infinite, that you just go until you die. You don't complete levels. And I think the reason why the scales of success are so different is because when you buy Sonic and the Secret Rings, you are spending $60 on it, and then you sit down on your couch and you have to make a conscious decision, I'm going to play Sonic right now. So then you go to your couch, turn on the Wii, get out your controller and play it for a little bit. Maybe you're satisfied, maybe you're not, and then you turn it off and go on your way, and then you don't play it again until you think, I should play Sonic. And when it involves that kind of level of work, then the type of game that Sonic and Secret Rings isn't ideal for it. Whereas then when you take it and put it onto your phone, and it's very similar gameplay, and you're able to play through a quote-unquote level in about 30 seconds, and you go until you lose, it saves your progress, then you turn it off and put it back in your pocket. Suddenly, I'm standing in line at the grocery store, and it's going a little bit slowly, so I pull out my phone, play it for 30 seconds, and then put it back, and I have a great time. And so that combination of it's free to download, it's playable in 30-second to 5-minute bursts with really kind of satisfying short bits of content, and that you have it with you at any point, that all of those are competing factors that are impacting how we see games be developed.
Perhaps Matt here is underestimating exactly how bad Sonic and the Secret Rings was. I mean, I even played the game on the first year of the Wii, and I got as far as I could, but really it wasn't very well made. But coming up, we're going to listen to a clip on Alex talking about matching the complexity of Fly Drill and where he gets his inspiration from, how to hit that sweet spot as far as the market he was aiming for.
I made that, and my biggest inspiration at the time was Cannabalt, which is, the very first auto runner game where you just press a button to jump and the screen scrolls, and it's very simple, and works with a really simple scoring system where you just go as far as you can and then you die, and there's not even a high score table, but people really like it. And I was like, I'll just use that. And turned out, because Fly Drill was such a much more complicated and inaccessible game, that totally was not the appropriate format to put onto it. And so I realized that it would have been a lot more effective to use a more sophisticated sort of gameplay structure on top of the basic gameplay in order to make it easier for people to get into and stay motivated, in a way that's appropriate to the complexity of the game.
I think it's worth pointing out here that Alex is very concerned as a game designer about how to motivate his players and how to keep them interested in the gameplay system that he's trying to teach them, and the gameplay systems that are important for playing the game well. And we'll hear coming up how these kinds of interests may or may not necessarily be the things that are important to people looking to market their games. So I asked Matt in particular about how the free-to-play business model is used to help, instead of teaching players how to get across obstacles and how to learn the systems, helping players to circumvent these systems, circumvent the work, and circumvent the learning that they need to master and enjoy gameplay systems.
I'm actually a really big fan of free-to-play. That is probably no surprise since I'm working in the free-to-play industry. But you're right that for a lot of games out there, free-to-play exists as a way to take friction in certain parts of the game and go back to that same desire to accelerate or skip certain things. But I actually think that type of purchase is withdrawing a little bit, and it's a return also to vanity items, premium items, and that you can have a really, really good core experience with the game in one way, and then you can get more with a premium purchase. Downloadable content, I think, was kind of a precursor to what we've seen with free-to-play gaming, and there was even a backlash against that in the hardcore gaming community, seen as selling you a pizza but removing a slice. Whereas I no longer see it that way, because it's really replacing expansion packs and giving a means for developers to provide you with a lot more content. And as far as free-to-play is concerned, It's a way to actually allow the developer and the creator of a brand to be much more successful with that brand for the whole, without having to go into non-gaming channels for that. Like, I have bought so many pieces of Super Mario paraphernalia, and I've spent much more money than just buying like Super Mario 1, 2, and 3. And that is something that Nintendo put together as a way to both delight its hardcore fan base while also allowing itself to make greater profits. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's giving people that love a product more ways to interact with that product.
Everything that Matt said here is true in terms of creating a video game and thinking of it as a brand in order to deliver pleasurable experiences to the player, and then profiting off of the many ways that players might want to express themselves further in and around those experiences. And the hard part for any designer is coming up with a way to create a smooth play experience without necessarily shortcutting the design. And that's something that I asked Alex about specifically, because I know with Flydrill, he had his core gameplay systems in place, but he struggled to attain a certain level of popularity because his game didn't feature a lot of the same leveling up experience point based hooks that a lot of other free internet flash games have. And without these easy and obvious hooks, it was hard to convince people to invest enough time and energy to learning what Flydrill was really about.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's been a while since I've worked on the game, but I still have a work in progress like update where, you know, I have upgradable stats and stuff, but I haven't made any like UI or actually hooked it into the game. But, you know, I have variables now for like, you know, you can change your speed and stuff like that. And I mean, on top of that, I think I don't think it's fair to just blame the sort of structure on the game's lack of accessibility and success, because I think a lot of the games that I've tried to make, especially earlier on, they're just really kind of obscure, somewhat complicated game systems, that people don't grasp right away. And, you know, it's taken me a lot of, you know, gradual attempts at figuring out what it takes to turn someone from like a complete beginner to actually understanding the systems, because you can't, as I discovered, you can't just throw someone in and be like, okay, figure it out. So, you know, they're playing a Flash game, they're not gonna spend like an hour just trying to figure out how to be good at the controls.
Like I said, it's a tough challenge for developers to work with players and expect them to put in the work back. But if you're a developer who is looking for profit as the bottom line, if you're a games as business kind of person, then at some point you're going to look at what you have before you, the opportunities that you have, and you're going to start changing the design of your game in order to smooth over and eliminate some of these bumps that would turn away players. And I think this kind of thinking will eventually shape your game into one that is less about gameplay and more about experiences and passive entertainment and things other than gameplay, basically.
In a way, I see it as, you're right that it's a trend going on across all of media. People started talking about it with music years ago, that there was a shift because of free online music towards, instead of paying for physical objects, that you were paying for experiences. So that's why tour money shot way up, and that ended up being a very good boon for musicians that were able to attract well on tours. So kind of in the same way that you see music moving towards a personal expression of a brand. So you can now download, or you can now stream a song for free on Pandora. But then if you really, really love a band, you'll buy a t-shirt. And the only thing that freemium does, in my mind, is close that loop within a game. That you get, that both of these industries have decided that there is this core experience that people can enjoy on a mass market level. And then if you make a good enough and a fun enough and a player-oriented enough experience that people love it, then people will find Like they will want to express themselves in other ways and want to enjoy the product in other ways.
On the one hand, I completely agree. If you make a product that is player-oriented enough, you will develop a certain kind of fan base that will hopefully and eventually return some kind of money in a free-to-play business model. But player-oriented design is not the same as gameplay-focused or gameplay-primary design. And depending on how desperate or how sinister developers are when they're making these games, there are lines that get blurred and lines that can easily be crossed when certain types of game design elements and features are implemented in order to hook players and eventually draw more money out of them.
In that case, I'm not sure that it's even as far as like, oh, we're entering into a transaction between customer and developer. It's more like there's not even looking at it on that level. That would be too much respect. It's like fishing. When you're fishing, you're not like engaging in a transaction between like bait and fish. It's like you are creating a mechanism by which to hook people and reel them in. I mean, I say this as someone. Like my last project was a free-to-play, one of those kind of games. And I'm not going to judge it right now, but that's not the way people think about it as a transaction. No one thinks about it that way, even the people making it. So maybe the people playing it do. I don't know.
There obviously seems to be a good and a bad way to do a free-to-play game. One that respects the player and one that sort of tries to circumvent their defenses in order to profit from them. Free-to-play is a very particular kind of business model that combines with gameplay design that cannot necessarily be applied to all types of games. So this is what Matt had to say on the idea of if free-to-play would spread across the entire industry.
I mean, no. Like, if it is a better model, I think you'll see more games heading towards that, and it'll be in a way that benefits players. Like, I mean, I think there's a lot of free-to-play games out there that have the player central in mind, and that it's actually done with the idea of we want as many people as possible to be able to enjoy this game, then make money through in other ways. Like if you grow bored of a game because it had great graphics but didn't have a core loop that was fun, then that is a much worse thing and a bigger failure that leads to the death of companies than if you have the opposite, if you have a great core loop that, say, you didn't market very well.
So then I asked Matt about the exact language that players use to communicate their feelings and where or how he interprets the warning signs that lets him know that major changes need to be made in order to stay profitable and successful.
I think the language is important for the developers and for writers about it, but I don't think a universal language is... I don't think it's as important for players. I'm a big believer that if everybody is saying something about your product, that they're not saying it incorrectly. Like if everybody that speaks the English language misuses a word, that means that that word is now correct in that context. I don't believe it is a player's responsibility to be able to describe exactly why they're having fun. I think it's a player's responsibility to have fun. Like when you buy a game, the only thing that is required for you is that you have a fantastic time. If you think about what are all the ways that I can stand in front of a glowing screen and watch a story, there's a wide variety that has a whole bunch of different price points for what it took to develop it. You can watch broadcast TV and see a 30-minute episode. You can watch cable TV and watch a 1-hour episode over a 13-episode arc across the season. Or you can grab a bunch of friends and go to the movies and then actually sit in one place and immerse yourself in a really intense and emotional experience watching a 3-hour movie. And all of those take both different levels of artistry and finance and commitment and development, even comparing, say, one movie to another. And while they're vying with each other for your attention, you as the consumer don't, like, if one of those were to go away, it would be because you actually don't care about it anymore. Like, people, for the most part, stopped watching Westerns, and so Westerns as a market process stopped being made. That's not to say that they can never come back, but I don't think that there's a lot of people out there that think that they went away unjustly. Some amount of articulation is good, like saying, I liked this character, or I liked that scene, or I liked the writing style, or I didn't like this or that. That will help you know what you want to read more of in the future. But you also don't have to write a 20-page paper about the new criticism of how they use a metaphor. If the gameplay isn't there, if there isn't a strong core loop, then that game's not going to be fun anyways. And if the game isn't fun, then, like, if you have a gorgeous game that is moderately fun but not incredibly fun, then players are going to play it, then put it down, and then never come back to it. Like, when I'm going through Facebook posts or forums and talking to players, I'm not worried when people are upset or if everybody loves something or if everybody hates something. The only thing that scares me is when nobody is saying anything at all.
It's hard to remember exactly what the comments were, and I didn't get very many comments because the game wasn't very successful. I mean, the main thing is just that in terms of the feedback that I got from anonymous, players, there were quite a few people, in terms of the people who bothered to post anything, quite a few people who were like, really enjoyed it. And it was like, this is really unique. There were people who really appreciated it. And I'm sure on Congregate, there were probably some comments that were just like, game sucks. But I don't remember any very specific criticisms. And so in a way, I ended up just kind of guessing at what the problem was. But with Fly Drill, a lot of it was very vague, and then this kind of theoretical grasping out to figure out what I could use to explain the results that I'd gotten.
Well, and I want to interject that people should always try. Like, continue voicing your opinion. Like, it really, really matters. Like, I'm not saying, oh no, leave it to the people that have studied this. No, not at all. Like, everybody should voice their opinion. Like, that's why we have this wonderful age of social networking. But that it's also, like, it's your responsibility to enjoy and then perceive the product and then talk about it. And I guess if, like, players are worried that this aspect of games, that is the gameplay of it, is retreating, but I don't really see that borne out in the marketplace. And, like, marketing will probably always trend that way, but I guess I don't think I've spotted the same trends that you have, and you're actually much closer to that part of it than I am. But I haven't spotted those same trends of players devaluing gameplay over something like music or graphic quality.
The accounts of Matt and Alex are very telling. Using the Trigon theory only helps us understand their points of view better. While Matt is a gamer at heart, as a community manager, he views the intersection between gamers and developers differently than Alex. It makes sense that Matt is not very concerned with finer gameplay design details. It makes sense that he focuses on how players and developers communicate instead of balancing game design issues. On the other hand, Alex is very concerned with gameplay, or games as art. He's focused on conveying information, guiding the player, and building systems that have meaningful interaction without cluttering the experience with leveling up, experience points, and other hooks that complicate what games are. Remember, there are common gameplay features that, when taken to an extreme, work against games as art. It seems that Alex is very aware of this balancing act in game design. While Matt thinks about games as brands and ultimately about happy users, Alex thinks about conveying a dream he had through a gameplay design and why such an experience is meaningful. And with that, we have a perfect transition to the next segment. In Critical Cast Episode 3 Trigon, we got to hear a lot of voices from video game reviewers, critics, and developers, but there wasn't a lot of input from ordinary gamers. So in this next segment, we'll look at several threads from the NeoGAF forums to see how the Trigon theory helps us identify and understand gamers. Before we start, a round of introductions are in order. And remember, these participants are critical gamers from all around the world who have found the time to join me online for this discussion.
Okay. My name is Christopher Simpson. I am a graduate student in philosophy at the University of Texas, and I'm Richard's old friend. See, I've been playing games since as long as I can remember. I started with the NES, though I really got more into it around the Super NES, Genesis generation, and I've been playing games ever since.
Cool. Hello, my name is Daniel. I am a writer, and just this week I finished my first book. And I've known Richard for about 4 or 5 years online. So yeah, that's me. Okay, so this book is a 450-page analysis of Wario Land 4 for the Game Boy Advance.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a very long project, and I'm glad that he's finally seeing the end of it, so hopefully that all goes well.
Hello, I'm Marcus Terrell. I'm 27. I've been gaming since the NES. I'm Richard's brother. I'm sitting right next to him.
Hey, my name's Travis Clark, age 24, also in Texas, same town as Richard. Gaming background started back in Sega Genesis times, playing old Sonic. Just regular gaming since then, not anything too hardcore except from Smash Brothers.
I'm Victor Hunter, and I'm a Vancouver-based actor and video game enthusiast. I graduated from the musical theater program, and I've been playing games since I got my SNES when I was 3, and I've been pretty hardcore ever since.
So the topic we're all here to discuss is basically stemming from episode 3 of the podcast that I put out, and it's called Trigon because it's talking about a three-part way of viewing what video games are that I sort of came up with after listening to a lot of the discourse in the video game industry, what people were saying from the high level and the low level, going to different game design conferences, listening to them, listening to people on message board forums, and just sort of trying to come up with one theory on why there are so many differing opinions, but why we also see these very particular kinds of patterns within everything that we've been saying. So we all listen to the podcast, and this is the space where we can bring up anything that we want to discuss in response to that podcast, or anything that we wanted to, any kind of material that we found on the internet or in life that we wanted to bring to the table. I have a list of clips. Most of these are articles or message board forum posts that we'll look at, but I just wanted to open up the floor if there's anything anybody wanted to comment on specifically from the podcast or ask questions. We'll address that first. How did everybody like my singing, by the way? I thought that was
Those beautiful harmonies. Gorgeous.
I was sitting here trying to edit it, and I didn't know how to start the project, so I goof off in Audacity by recording my voice over and over, and then I started the first part, and I'm like, well, I have to do all the 3 parts of the game's views, and then I kept it in the final.
I think it sounded wonderful.
Thanks, Victor.
Wait, so that was just you recording that, Richard, and then you just layered your voices over each other.
Yeah,
right.
That was me over and over.
Oh, Jesus. I thought it sounded like 4 different people or something.
Yeah, there was one track that had four harmonies in there. So I got this first clip I want us to take a look at. I think when we click the YouTube tab on the left side, we'll all be able to watch it together. We're only going to watch a few minutes of this, but it's pretty interesting. And the point is to watch this clip in light of the Trigon theory and just see what you have to say about it. So I'm going to grab the link real quick.
Yeah, I'm good.
It looks like I'm in.
Yeah, it seems to work.
Alright, Design Secrets. I'm Brandy Grace, and I am the CEO and Chief Creative Director of Transform Entertainment. We're a company making AAA games on the console for women. So, I thought I should talk about what is really the differences in designing for the female market as opposed to the male market, and how you can take advantage of some of the research I've done. As a psychology, this means that there's no real pressure for girls to push themselves the way there are for guys, and there's no real sense of reward if you succeed in the end anyway. So what we end up seeing is that overall, those of you who are familiar with the design flowcharts, we try to usually keep our games up and down throughout here. But in general, males try to gravitate more to the higher end, and women try to gravitate more to the low end. We want to take as much challenge as is necessary to not be bored, but as little as possible so we don't fail. Because as we saw, there wasn't much risk, there wasn't much reward to the risk. I did an article recently where I talked about this and got in trouble for not saying why. About 10 to 15% of females indicate challenge as a reason for playing games. The numbers will go upwards if they specify that it's women that self-identify as gamers or because they have a specific platform they're targeting. The highest number is 25%. That's still 75% of females that don't. Which means if you look at how many women there are in developed countries, 10%, that's still 63 million women in the world, which if you assume only a third of them have access to games, that's still more than the number of Modern Warfare 3 games that were sold. So when I talk about 10% of women being into challenge, that doesn't mean that only 10% of a game is women because it's a challenge-heavy game. It could still be 100% because 14 million is less than 21. All right, so how does knowing this about challenge affect the design? Well, here's a couple of very quick, easy things you can do to attract more women. Create a readily available easy mode and start at the lowest curve level for easy mode so that when you get to the end, you're now at the start level of normal mode. Same with normal to hard. Reward your players for achievements across all difficulties. Sometimes you'll see, oh, if you get the ending in easy mode, it's the bad ending. Only the ending in extreme hard mode is the good ending. So actually give them a complete rewarding experience no matter what challenge they choose for. And when you give them rewards, make sure that it's not just really unnecessary to the game. They want to see that there's some progress in the game. So they won't do a challenge simply for a challenge. Majority of them will want to see some other reason. I don't build a building because it gives me a platinum gold star achievement. I do it because it houses my things or builds something else in the city or does something. Failure. So Joseph and Brad found that women who were told in a test that a test would only measure weakness in math, those women were greatly outperformed by women who were told that a test would only measure their strength in math. Women tend to avoid failure, because if you saw with the challenge, we don't get much reward for going after things that are risky, so we try to avoid it. So when you look at the two genders overall, failure is treated as an obstacle to overcome by men, and it becomes a motivation to play by challenge. Whereas for women, that's a sign that we're over our heads, and we tend to set down the controller and walk away. Oh, this game is not made for me, because I failed. So, design secrets you can use. Incorporate soft failures. It's not game over, you suck, lose half your coins. It's, oh, reset the puzzle. Minimize any kind of sense of punishment. Don't take half my coins. Don't make me wait 15 extra minutes because I have to run and find something. Just, I didn't make it. And instead of criticizing, make it an encouragement. I like to joke about, it's like the Republican philosophy. It's not haves and have-nots. It's haves and soon-to-haves. It's not failed and succeeded. It's succeeded and it will succeed eventually. Keep trying. Try again, another quarter. Another one, cooperation or competition. Girls in grades 6 and 7 rate being popular and well-liked as more important than being perceived as competent or independent, whereas boys, on the other hand, feel that competency and independence are more important. That makes me kind of sad. When you look at the market research, about 70% of women report playing games as a means to socialize. Women in general have more of an interest, especially when we're younger, and it doesn't really go away, in worrying about what society and our peers think about us in ways of are you friendly versus are you a bitch, more than are you competent and somebody I should respect. And you can argue as to why that should be there, but we have to recognize that is a social and cultural aspect of this market. So cooperative. We see a lot of games that try to say, oh, well, it's cooperative because it's player, or it's team versus team. So you're cooperative within your team, but then you're fighting each other. So it's really focused on the competitive. And even within those teams, we really care about, are you the one that's getting the most kills on your team? Do we care that you are the one that is not embarrassing the team, which is something a lot of women will end up worrying about substantially. Also issues of fairness. There's also concern about social risk in that when you put women in a randomized online space as opposed to dealing with other people that they know, it introduces social risk. At the worst case, maybe this person I'm introducing into my virtual life is a serial killer who will stalk me and come after me at work. At the least point, maybe it's a jerk who's going to just make my entire experience online and through the game very unpleasant. So just because you're putting them in a cooperative-esque play does not necessarily fulfill the socializing means. They want to socialize with people they know and in a substantial way. Another thing to keep in mind, this study from 2003 observed that in a puzzle-solving competition, very similar to games, where all performances are public, males outperform females in a co-ed environment, but when the genders are partitioned, the gap disappears. There are a lot of numerous psychological theories as to why this could be. The latest one is something called stereotype threat, which says that basically, if there is a concern anywhere or an idea anywhere that you could end up conforming to a stereotype, part of your brain, even if you're not around anybody that believes in it, will be worried and running cycles of concern about not adhering to the stereotype and thus distract you just enough to suck that little bit more and possibly fall into it because you're worried about it on some level. So.
But yeah, this was a part of a short version of a talk that she gave. I got a chance to listen to the longer version, but I just want to know what people thought of some of the points that she brought up in terms of where her topic started from, which was how to attract a wider female audience when you're making your games.
Yeah. I find she said something about the getting achievements and them just achieving them for the sake of achieving them, and then achieving them to get some kind of reward or at least see something coming back to you from it, you know? And the first thing that came to my mind is, and this has been on my mind a lot lately, is the me-verse as opposed to achievements and trophies. And having that environment to socialize about things you've accomplished and see that come back in a social way. I think that's obviously a deliberate design choice on Nintendo's part, where they want, instead of just accomplishing things for the sake of it, you're getting something social back, and it promotes discussion and reinforcement of goal setting and things like that.
Yeah, at one point she said that there's a lot of female gamers that do not care about challenge for challenge sake. They don't care about sort of improving their skills or overcoming challenges. What they really want is to do the challenge to get something else, like Victor was saying. And there was another part in the segment that I just played where she said, reward players for getting to the end of the game or reward players for getting to the end of the game and accomplishing certain tasks, and don't just give them a cheap reward like, hey, you did a great job, but give them something they want. And she specifically said story elements, something that progresses the story or advances their character in some way. And I thought that was interesting how one of the main examples she lists for the rewards that you get out of a gameplay experience is story elements. And that was part of a theme that I heard a lot when I went to the conference, where people talked about what kind of rewards you give players for doing things, and everyone was talking about how do we reward players, how do we keep them playing and coming back, and they all said story elements, vanity items, graphical this and that, a song, but very few people actually mention anything positive about just doing things for the task itself.
Right. Huh.
Anybody else?
I agree with that. I think we've all, as gamers, been putting up with the point system for so long. I think maybe that's why guys are used to points, is because every video game we've played since we're little has points in it.
Yeah.
Everything's about points. You're like, okay, well, at least I can rank myself by points, even if I don't really care about points, because no one actually cares about points. I don't think it's just native to women. I just think women are new to video games, that they haven't gotten used to getting points for no reason. I don't think anybody actually likes points.
Yeah, in some ways, points are supposed to be a feedback element where, depending on how well you did, you'd get a very clear, quantifiable way of measuring your progress. Kind of like how grades in school are supposed to work. But if you miss 9 out of 10 questions, you get a 90, you get a 90% or an A or whatever. And that was supposed to be a great way of reflecting back on all that work you did and how well you performed at the task set before you. So and in some games, points are pretty useless. Like barely anybody pays attention to them. Like the original Mario Bros. that all the way at the top there's the score, and I don't think anybody, even on their extra competitive modes, play Mario Bros. For score. They pretty much play it for a speed run.
Even Mega Man 1.
Yeah.
Mega Man 1, and they got rid of that quickly. Like, they realized we don't need this score. And I think that's really manifest itself nowadays. Like, to capitalize on that, that's how things like the gamer score have come up. And it's like, how can we ensure that there's still, like, these people latch on to the idea of a high score, but it's obsolete in games now. How can we keep a score something that's in the forefront of their minds still?
When I was at the talk, a lot of the points that Brandy makes in this talk and the one I listened to, everything she said in many ways was true. Like, to attract a wider female audience, you have to tailor your game in a certain way so that it basically appeals to more diverse people and people that don't share all the same individual interests, which is just common sense. Like, to get more people involved in the thing you're doing, you got to put more things in there that they like. But I just thought it was interesting that on the scale that she was talking about, as far as making mobile social games more appealing to women and a larger audience, she basically said you need to put in a lot of things that have nothing to do with gameplay. And she specifically said at one point, women, 90% of them reported that they play games to socialize. And I know that the social aspect to games is a big part of what games are and their history of games going back all the way in human history. But in some ways, it made me think that, are people really playing this game just as a fancy chat room, so to speak, where they go and meet in these particular areas and all they really want to do is share a voice chat stream or just type in with text chat, and they're not really there to do anything about the game itself.
Right.
That makes me wonder.
Yeah, I mean, that's sometimes I think if that's why I play Monster Hunter, you know? Like, sometimes I just want to hang out with the guys, and why not kill a monster while I'm doing it, you know?
Okay, so I feel in games, in-game design that scaling difficulty for both women and children is a bit of an issue. I play games with my fiance, who is from China. I'm actually doing this recording from Shanghai, and so I try to be aware of the level of English and also the difficulty of games. And I think that women, while they may not be as invested in challenge, I still think that they like a challenge and they like to be tested, but perhaps not in the same way as men, which is what the video suggests. So I think things like the Wii U design, where each character is given a different role, I think something like that works quite well to introduce them into games. Last year I played Super Mario Galaxy 2 with my fiance, and she played the co-star, I played Mario, and there's a certain amount of difficulty to each of those different roles, and that was really appropriate to our different relationships with games. I mean, I've played games for a long time, like everyone else here, but she hadn't. So for her, I think these different roles work well as an entry point into games.
Yeah, well, and that's like the sort of asynchronous gameplay has sort of gotten like the moniker of of girlfriend mode, and like it's sort of kind of become a thing. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that nickname, but you know, it's and with the Wii U, that's definitely gonna be something that we'll see more of, which I think is cool, because you know, I want to do co-op with people, but you know, skill levels are different between all kinds of people, whether it's a female or not. You know, if I wanna play games with my little cousin or something like that, I want something that we can experience together, but something that might have more accessibility. So
it's very interesting that you guys brought up asymmetrical gameplay. I don't know if it was in the clip that I played for you, but that's something that Brandy specifically mentioned in order to make games more accessible, especially to women. She said add more asymmetrical gameplay and have more distinct roles that are all interesting and valuable, and so that everyone can play, but not everyone has to be the aggressor, not everybody has to be the highly skilled role, but something like
totally.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think that we don't need to scale the difficulty down in a form of demeaning way, but I feel that we can still scale it appropriately, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Travis has something to say about some of the gaming sessions that we did. We've had a couple of Wii U nights over where my place is, and we played 4 or 5 player Nintendo Land games, and of course that title specializes in asymmetrical gameplay using the gamepad pad. We played a lot of Animal Crossing Sweet Days, Metroid Blast, Luigi's Mansion, Mario Chase, and maybe a few others. But we played those with Travis's wife, if he had anything to say about maybe how she took to the whole experience.
She's on the phone with her parents, but I can tell you that coming from a non-gamer, because she would be considered a non-gamer for the most part, she really enjoyed Luigi's Mansion, and she enjoyed being the support role in Metroid and being the support role in a lot of things without having everything depending on her. Mm-hmm. And so she didn't have to feel self-conscious about winning or losing or letting the team down, but she was able to participate and actually enjoy it just as much as the rest of us were. And I personally feel the same way, because I haven't played any Mario games, like maybe a little bit, like an hour total of Mario games. And being the support role, adding in blocks and stuff, I was like, yeah, I can help out the team, and I can enjoy the game. But if I keep on falling down over and over again because I'm not used to it, it's okay, because I don't have to do that part.
Yeah, that was pretty rough when you were in there.
Yeah, I think asymmetrical gameplay is better than toggle switches of easy and hard or handicaps. Handicaps are the worst. They're always just messed up. You can't ever balance handicaps right.
Yeah, they're a little bit abstract too, especially the way certain designers like Masahiro Sakurai does it. He likes to give you a scale from 1 to 9, and even in Kid Icarus or Super Smash Brothers, you don't know exactly how many factors are affected in that slider, but you just know that something's getting easier, and it just kind of messes with your perception on all the relative strengths and weaknesses of your moves.
Actually, Kid Icarus is a really good example, though, because like I thought that the difficulty settings on that were really smart. Mm-hmm. I didn't even think about Kid Icarus. Yeah. Oh, totally. No, it's genius. That game's genius. Oh god.
Yeah, in the last part of my 10-part series review on Kid Icarus, I did this contrast between Miyamoto's design and Sakurai's design. And even though they're two of my favorite developers, they have opposite styles for the most part when you go point by point. And Miyamoto's very much like, I'm going to create one mode. In that one mode, you can use power-ups or take the easy route, or you have the option of, in Mario's case, holding the run button to make yourself go faster, but it also makes the game harder to play. Playing with or without certain power-ups, styling on enemies by jumping off all of them instead of landing on the ground, taking on challenges all at once instead of taking out enemies one by one. So he gives you this entire space to play in. And if you've seen any of these super play videos for Super Mario Bros. Wii and Super Mario Bros. Wii U, they are fantastic. Maybe we'll watch one in a second.
They are very, very good.
They are fantastic, but he's pretty much that kind of design. I'm going to give you one space to play in, and no matter what level player you are, all of your actions can be sort of compared, and you can better understand how good people are, or even in their special individual ways, just because you know that everyone's dealing with the same set of tools. But Sakurai is very different. He's like, I'm going to rapidly change the tools so that you get to a certain kind of experience, but I'm going to make you very aware that the tool you have in your hand is variable. You have a 1 to 9 switch. Like, find your sweet spot and understand that you can push yourself in a very minute degrees, up or down on the sweet spot, depending on how you feel. So Sakurai is very much like, in a metacognitive way, observe how you're playing for yourself so you can better find the sweet spots for yourself.
And just all the options he throws at you, like even in Smash Brothers, it's just like, even now, people will always debate, what is the right way to play Smash Brothers, that sort of, just because he throws so many different elements at you.
Yeah, I've been on the wrong end of, or not the wrong end, but the bitter end of those kind of arguments for so long, trying to educate people about how even the strictest tournament rule set you'll find about Smash Brothers, it's just one option that a community likes, and they express themselves by drilling down into that option. And even though we all know that there's multiple ways to play, like, we're fine where we are. Everyone just find something you find fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Miyamoto and Sakurai represent different ends of selectable and scalable difficulty. So I haven't played Kid Icarus, but it sounds like there's a lot of options to scale the difficulty manually, whereas it's the other way with Miyamoto. I think for designing difficulty for women, I think that scalable difficulty is probably a good way to go. I mean, I feel sometimes if you play a game and if you select maybe easy instead of normal, or normal instead of difficult, I mean that can be you can take a bit of a hit to your confidence.
Yeah.
So, something like scalable difficulty works in really well in that regard.
Gameplay. That you're not going to have most of the women on the co-op team that want to be the ones running out in the middle of the fray and doing melee. Allow them to be an equal partner if they are healers or supporters, for example, and create those supportive roles so that they can come in on that level. Make these all equal. And don't force players to measure themselves against one another. A very good example of something to look at is Dance Dance Revolution. If you know that old game, in the arcade mode, it had 3 modes. Single player, versus, and double. Double meant 1 player on both pads, single was 1 player, 1 pad, and versus was 2 players, 1 on each pad. When you saw the guys coming in, they always went straight to versus. Girls would come in who played it, they knew that you could play with your friends, and the first thing they'd do is always go to double, thinking that was the mode they wanted. I worked in an arcade where I had to tell them, you want versus, not double, and I'd have to explain it to them because they tried to fight, no, I don't want versus, even though that was the gameplay they really wanted. So that idea of I'm competing against somebody actually brought them out of the gameplay and made them uncomfortable. Now what it turned out is versus is you're supposed to compare your scores to each other, which the guys did. The girls compared their score to their previous score. So they measured their own progress against themselves, not against each other. It never even crossed their minds, whereas the guys were always like, ha, I got an A, you got a B, you suck, sucker. So, So don't force them to put into a place where they are being measured. Allow for some kind of out. If you're going to have competitive play, that's fine, but you don't have to keep stats no matter what they do. Allow them a non-statistic keeping area. And a little parting wisdom, and also plenty of stories if there's no questions. Separate from equal is an important means. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's inferior. And unfortunately, a lot of devs that are not in the market they are working for will tend to kind of look down on the other market because they don't understand the fun in the gameplay that they want. So just remember, respect everyone the same. Okay.
All right. So on that last clip we heard, you saw that bullet point at the top about asymmetrical gameplay And you also saw that she mentioned a little bit about feedback, and that certain female gamers don't like to have their scores compared to other players. They don't necessarily want to compete in that way, but they do appreciate comparing their progress to their own history, which is something that we were kind of talking about before, just being able to use points and feedback as a way of measuring your own progress. And perhaps Brandy unfairly characterized male players as instantly throwing jabs at each other when they get the opportunity to compare their scores, but I'll just let that one slide for now. Yeah, so how do you think that creating this separate but equal idea in terms of gameplay, how that idea works in terms of design spaces? Because a lot of games that we play have different characters, abilities, power-ups, and roles that are created from these in a very functional way, but it's not necessarily possible to treat an increasingly complex design space where different options are all equal within that design space. I think I wrote this one article trying to talk about the way emergence works, and whenever you put a goal in a system, it sort of instantly creates a value scale in which to evaluate every action within that system. Is it going to get you closer to winning that goal or not? And when you have elements within that design space, some are going to naturally be better at getting to that goal than others. And even though in gameplay have interesting choices, there are a lot of cool nuanced things that can sit side by side with the moves that are obviously good for winning and obtaining that goal. There's only so much room in the design space to have different things be equal. Some things have to be nuanced, some things have to be harder to pull off, and that's how the space is designed. And I wonder how much of that idea of making games more accessible to people who want to just be different but equal, like how those two ideas are going to butt heads when you're actually trying to design a game.
Yeah, I was thinking of Runner 2, the Bit Trip Runner sequel, and I was watching a gameplay video of it the other day, and it like as you're playing it, it will show an arrow that will, like, if you want the easier path, follow the green arrow. If you want the harder path, follow the red arrow. And like, I guess that's sort of a way you can facilitate that. Like, it really depends what the person wants to get out of the game, really. I mean, if you want to take the easier path, you're still playing through the full game. It's like you're not limiting yourself to a quote-unquote easy mode. But I don't know. It's tricky to find that middle ground. And do you even want to find that middle ground? Like there are some games where you're gonna want to just make options that are going to be brutally hard, and things that won't be for everybody. But at the same time, like with Runner 2, you can make a game where someone can get, more or less the full experience of the game. You can play through it start to finish, and you won't, tear your hair out after your 200th death or anything. I mean, you might still, because those games are incredibly hard. But the principle itself is that you can get through it, and if you want to, you can challenge yourself. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in terms of, you were in some ways in that comment addressing that some design decisions you can't reconcile. Like, at some point you can't have things both ways, so perhaps there are options that allow the player to weave in and out of certain kinds of difficulty or certain kinds of play styles, knowing that they're not exactly equal, but that doesn't mean they're not meaningful. And I think a lot of people, when they hear challenge, they think of the super hard sort of committed hardcore gamer kind of way. But in many ways, challenge, even for easy challenges, even for easy games, are just as meaningful because it's all relative anyway. But
Yeah,
even
totally.
when you're completely overskilled and you're playing an easy challenge, there's a lot in that interaction, even though it was easy for you, that's meaningful, that reflects your personal skills, your personal play style, and all these other things.
And you're still choosing to invest your time in that, and you're still choosing to, invest something in it at least, whether or not you're being physically challenged by it. It's still an experience that you're having. And
very true.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is related to education. For me, I'm a ESL teacher over here in China, and this point that you bring up, Richard, comes up often, and that is, at which point do you have to push the students to try their bit harder and to overcome the difficulty of what they're learning? And at what point do you have to go back and give them a bit of a breather, a bit of a chance to get around? And so I think, just like in education, these aspects have to be incorporated into the design. So, so for the player to get through the game, they must show a certain level of competency. But I think at times, the game designer can be lenient with that and let them kick back and review something. So for example, in this game that I've written this stupidly long book about, Warrior Land 4, there's one part in the game where you have to cross a certain area, and that requires skills that you've built up through the rest of the game. But if you fail, then you fall down into another area, and you have to review another part of the game system. And
Right.
I think this is an example of the. This is exactly what I would do in my classroom, right? Where if the students don't get it, then review something else that leads into or works into that.
Sonic, like old Sonic games. Like if you fall, there's still a place for you to play, and you might even be able to get back up to the top, the top level of the stage. But it doesn't just kill you right away. It says, okay, you couldn't quite handle that, but here's another section for you to play through, and maybe you can make your way back up.
That's a really interesting comment about Sonic. I know the old school games, the highest path is usually the best path because it has all the coins, power-ups, and all the cool loop-de-loops. So you want to stay as high as possible, which is cool to do in a platforming game or a game where you fall due to gravity. And I think the design that I liked the most was Sonic Rush, because Sonic games are notorious for the death pits, right? And because you're moving so fast, you can never see them coming. But in Sonic Rush, the gameplay is displayed on the top screen and the bottom screen simultaneously. So when you're on the bottom screen, you know that if you go any lower, it's a death pit. But if you're on the top screen, you know you have that cushion. And as you're zooming through the level, you can see things on the lower screen or the screen you're not playing on that would sort of give you hints on how to play, maybe possible ways to move up or down between levels. And it incentivizes you and sort of scaffolds your progression through the level really well. And I thought that game did one of the best jobs of fixing some of the chronic Sonic design problems.
Yeah, that was so smart.
Yeah, I think so too. I remember when I play Sonic games now, like on the PS2 collections that they have, I always, with the old Sonics, I always pause, save my state, play a little bit, and I try and get that perfect run. And those pits, they really force me to to whore out those save states. I think in back to difficulty, right? I think that games can't compromise on the players' learning. So that is, we can't just let players get through the game and not actively participate in it. So that's so even though we have to scale the difficulty for different demographics, I feel that we can't compromise on it, because otherwise, games would become it would become what you allude to at the end of the podcast, which is where these kind of non-games and where gameplay itself is
secondary,
neglected and forgotten about.
Yes. Secondary at best. Yeah, I like how, in light of the Trigon theory, a lot of what we're saying really has to do with the games as art view, where we recognize that our skill and our competency level changes as we engage and as we play a game. We may not have what it takes to win now, but we know that in well-made games, at least we're on a very clear, very well-designed, and a very well-tuned path to getting to that level. And a lot of stuff we're saying here is learning is important, instruction's important, feedback's important, not changing around the variables in a very obscure, hidden way behind the scenes is important, but letting everybody engage in a space where they can grow and be better, like that's all important to us, and that's very games as art. And what we're seeing is that if you aren't clear about what games are or what's great about them, it's so easy to slip into a lot of the tips and the wisdoms that you're hearing from people who are really about games as business. They'll just be like, oh, just throw this in there to make your gamers happy, put the gamers first. It doesn't matter how hard the game is, as long as the gamer does this, as long as they keep playing, as long as they put another quarter in. That's a very
the back of the box bullet points, like features staggering millions of frames and ultimate co-op death champion match edition, and like just the stuff does not really mean anything.
In light of the Trigon theory, if you look at everyone go to the YouTube tab real quick. I have something very important about gaming I want to show you guys. Everyone on the YouTube tab?
Yep.
Here we go. Watch this video. It'll change the way you think about games. Game over, yeah! You may have to turn it. You may have to turn it. I'm going to play it again because it has a lot of insight in there I want you guys to pay attention to. Game over, yeah! That's the best. Now I kind of meant it as a joke, but I think it says something very specific about how gamers treat game over and the whole process of learning and getting better. And it's just funny because this old Sega Rally game, like when you lose, it's not the end of the world, and you play the game, you did your best. Like there's nothing to get bent out of shape about, and you get this guy that just blares in your speakers, "Game over, yeah!" like that, and
that's awesome.
And I think that sums up my attitude about game overs. I think you heard in the Trigon podcast. There was this one guy from the Week in Confirm show that really thought game over was an antiquated vestige of past games.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, why do I ever have to see game over? Why can't the game just deal with it in a creative way? I'm like, well. Game overs are important, and sometimes you just don't want to keep pursuing a path that has no real meaning to what you're trying to develop your game around. If your game's about surviving and jumping and you fall in a hole, guess what? You need to get back to this jumping. You're probably messed up, so let's reset you a little bit. And if you do that too many times, here's a clear message that you need to either take a break or think about your strategy. Game over. Like, it's very clear on how game over communicates, I think, to gamers. So that's why the game over, is one of my mantras.
Yeah, I think that you should record your singing of the Game Over and then loop that a few times and layer it for the next podcast.
Yeah, harmonize that a little bit.
Oh man, you're giving me ideas.
A barbershop version would be lovely.
Yeah, they don't even know the half of our love for a Game Over
Yeah, like, we played, when we first heard this, we found a 10-minute recording of this, not looped, but one continual, and we played that for 10 minutes straight while setting a Smash Bros. Match on time for 10 minutes. And we played 2 or 3 rounds of pure, like, you wouldn't believe how funny that is. We'd have to do that sometime. Okay, so back to the Google Doc. But down at the bottom of the list, I have a lot of different articles and threads that I pulled from the internet. And if we just click on them and survey them, I just want to hear what you guys have to say as far as how what the comments you read line up with the Trigon view, and which view you think a particular comment lines up against. And perhaps if you're particularly game design inclined, how would you like satisfy that gamer without compromising too much? So like the first thread in the list underneath The first link says, click on the one that says Wii U no achievements. I'm not going to tell you what I think at first, so just kind of read the original post and scroll down and see if any of these posts catch your interest.
Okay. Like...
Kojima.
Okay, this is... Alright, I hate this. This is actually the kind of the subject of the first episode of my podcast, which I'm going to plug, 8 Bits of Destiny.
Oh, go ahead.
The 8 Bits of Destiny podcast, which I'm about to record another episode right after this. But,
Excellent.
This idea that achievements need to be a part of a system is so, I think, I'm of the mind that the Miiverse is just better. Like, it will enhance, like, a life on Earth far more than achievements ever will, you know? Like, there's something to be said about being able to choose what moments of a game you find meaningful and being able to actively share those in a way that means something to you, as opposed to a canned, like, well, this is what the publisher arbitrarily chose as being achievements. Like getting a platinum trophy does not necessarily mean you got more out of the game than anybody else, you know? It's oh god, I could talk about this forever, so please stop me. Stop me if it gets a little long-winded. But achievements are not the be-all, end-all of how we should be socializing about our games and discussing them and even comparing experiences. Like, it's so much more meaningful when someone, you know, draws a picture of something that they thought was cool. I mean, it's I don't know, I think it's so backwards to think that this should be a mandatory thing and that this is something we should be striving towards achievements, which are an arbitrary system of numbers that add to something that really does not mean anything beyond you've accomplished all these, like, bullet points.
Anybody else?
I would agree. I find that the first response by Nico Frog, not the system of choice for hardcore gamers confirmed. I mean, I know pretty hard at that.
Brilliant.
I mean, I've played games for a while and I just ignore achievements. I think, they are just like doggy treats, really. For me, just going back to the education thing and how this ties into that, because rewards are about motivations, which are to get the player to engage in the mechanics and mastery and so on. That's all education. To go back to that, for me in the classroom, I teach children mostly, and I think this ties into this whole achievement thing is analogous to a teacher giving students some kind of reward, like stars or stickers or stamps, and and I never give those kind of rewards ever. Yeah, I think the other thing that's wrong with this is the definition of hardcore gamer and the way in which these different labels are applied to the different demographics. And as we talked about earlier with the asynchronous multiplayer and difficulty, I think it's much more complicated than that. So, yeah.
I think. Anybody else?
I'm going to echo kind of what Kai is saying in the chat. How I think it was kind of funny before how we were talking about how points didn't matter, but the achievement system is an attempt to create a system in which to make points matter, which is what Kai's kind of saying on the side right here. His little block post.
I'll read that real quick. Kai's post, achievements were conceived in part as an artificial player investment scheme. They allow the publisher to set the terms for what players should find valuable in a game. This creates standardization that some players like. They wish to see where they stack up against everyone in an official framework. The downside, of course, is that it's publisher telling you what parts of the game
I think that it shouldn't be the publishers Well, is it the publishers that decide achievements, or is it the game designers? I feel that it should be the role of the game designers. But perhaps
I'm
it
just
could
gonna
be a
lump
bit
them
of
all together.
it could be a bit of both. I'm not sure. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's two sides to achievements that most people don't separate when they talk about them, and I think clearing this up is really important. One, you have just the achievement, which is a goal built into the game code, and I think there's no difference between an achievement and any other goal that the game tells you to go for, any other task they want you to shoot for, and that the game recognizes in any form or fashion. Stars in Mario, the star coins are like achievements in that they set the goal. But there's the other half of achievements, which is the gamer score. And the gamer score has all sorts of problems because it's sort of pushing up against that intrinsic, extrinsic motivator subject that is very important for video games. And when you incentivize an activity or an action that's not mindless or just route memory with external motivators, it's been shown in developmental psychology and all these other tests that it kills the interest in the task itself, and it just makes people less creative and less interested overall, and it just sort of dive bombs from there. So gamer scores and what people think about them as being sort of a universal measure doesn't work, and that's very problematic. So what you have with a lot of Nintendo systems are achievements that are just goals, but that pop up, and you don't get points for them. And I think that's a very critical difference. And I think there was one comment in the thread, I can't find it, but he was like, Steam's achievements stink because it doesn't automatically tally up your points and then allow you to compare what you have with other people. That means you're useless. And right when I read that, I was like, wait a minute. Steam's is useless just because you can't do the thing that's basically what makes Xbox achievements so dangerous. I'm like, that is funny how that person said that exactly. As soon as you can't compare it or he said the points that they give you in Steam are useless because you can't easily compare it. I'm like, that is true. Yeah. And I think that's the good part.
And it's like, it's like the downside is that they're not quantifying their experience. Which is like, what, how, I don't know.
Yeah. I thought of a way to fix achievements for the next generation of Xbox, but I don't think they're going to do it because they don't listen to me. But the whole idea of achievements was finding out ways to compare things between gamers and the things they accomplish. And at some point, it got, because they're mandatory, it got kind of messed up, and some achievements are trash. Some people throw in achievements in the games just so people can buy them and quickly earn them. Like the Avatar game was notorious for having a full set of achievements you could get in like 30 minutes, an hour or so that were really easy. So if you want to compare skill using achievement points, it doesn't work because there's no central authority and central like criteria that they're all being created to measure up to. So I thought of a way of, what if you don't let Microsoft determine how much points these are, or the developers, but when there are achievements, you create your own custom list. And that basically says, I think these challenges are interesting, worth achieving, or valuable to me. I'm going to see how many other people, how they measure up to my sort of playlist, so to speak. And you could easily see like how many people got far in Mega Man 10 achievements, and you could even rank them on your own little way, whether it's stars or just a simple list. And that'd be a much better way for you to both recognize what you value and find out how others measure up on that very personal scale.
Yeah. Like, and oh god, what was I gonna say? Nope, I lost it. That's fine.
Alright.
I'll add something here. This reminds me of a investigation that was done by the MTV multiplayer blog a few years ago. I think it might have been Stephen Totilo who did this, where in 1 month he tried to get some ridiculous gamer score, and in order to do this, he would go and he would buy all these cheap kids games that they made it easy to get all these points, and so that's a fast. And I guess the point that he was trying to illustrate is that there are some people who actually have this approach, right? And I think this is a result of what happens when you quantify something and then represent it as maybe like the player's skill or their worth or their value. Yeah, it's pretty sad.
Yeah, and it just creates a divide. It's like it makes it such a binary thing. Like, did you get all the stuff in this game, quote unquote, that we think you should have got? Then you're hardcore. And all it does is it keeps that mentality going, which is not productive. It doesn't help people in any way.
There is definitely something to be said about how the rise of the Xbox and the whole Microsoft business model and philosophy has shaped the way we talk and think about games, especially in terms of achievement, what we value in games, and how we understand game release schedules, and basically how we think about console gaming overall. And I think you were speaking to that just a little bit.
Yeah.
But one thing I also wanted to point out was so many people think achievements are a standard that needs to be rolled along with every future generation of hardware. And that's very much told me or reminded me of the technology view of games. And if achievements are basically like energy efficient screens or a higher resolution or something of that nature, then it would make sense that everything would or should have it from now into the future. But that's just simply not the case. Like, even beside the fact that achievements are potentially gameplay killing dangerous things to put in your game or to mandate, like, what if you just don't want to have them? What if you just don't care? Then it's definitely a much more personal / arbitrary decision. It's not something that's automatic.
Yeah, it seems that the view of the technology part of the Trigon is related to the futurist perspective, where everything that is new and modern is good, and everything that is old, like, well, maybe game over, but everything that's old is no good. So futurists, they constantly accept the new and reject the old, no matter the consequences that may have on the overall on life or whatever it is. It's been discussed.
All right, let's move on to the next post if nobody else has anything to add to achievement.
I think we all agree that the Miiverse is the best thing ever. Yeah? Is that how we...
Yeah.
And achievements lead to a dystopian Orwellian future where we're all enslaved? Okay.
One thing I'll throw in real quick. One thing that you can do in your design to keep intrinsic motivation high is to celebrate achievements / accomplishments with surprise celebrations instead of pre-scripted, pre-announced rewards. So instead of like, you're going to get this if you do this, they just do it and you go, very good. Yeah. So I think the what New Super Mario Bros. U does, where it's like, did you know you just beat it in under 100 seconds? Congrats! And you're like, I didn't even know that, but I kind of feel good about it. I think that's definitely more aligned with the games' art.
Where when you jump on a bunch of enemies in a row and you hear applause. Like, that's, that's
I love the applause.
That's so sweet.
I love it. I was like, I didn't know the developers think I'm so cool. Yeah. I'm gonna pause it and save again. And somebody, if you see an article in the list you want to talk about, we'll do that one next. This is another NeoGAF thread, and it goes straight to a post at the top that I think is worth reading out loud. It's from H Prestige, and he's quoting someone. He says, or he's quoting FreeZKO. Does Journey actually have gameplay? ? Not really. But how many games does Gen have actual gameplay? I can think of Demon / Dark Souls and Nintendo games, but that's it. And I'm like,
vague generalizations everywhere. What does that even? God, that's so frustrating.
Take a moment to scan the thread. Maybe read the original post. The second post from the top is particularly funny.
Yeah, I mean, the second post is quite ironic because Black Ops 2, in terms of interaction, is just walking and then like lining up a target and pushing a button. So Black Ops 2 isn't. Black Ops 2 isn't very much ahead of Journey in that sense. I mean,
at least in single player.
Well, Well, I don't play the multiplayer side of things, but no, I mean at least in terms of interplay and dynamics and so on, it's just see it, push a button, and so on. So yeah.
Somebody called Journey a walking simulator.
Well,
and then they respond, it had jumping too, if I remember correctly.
So is Super Mario Brothers a walking to the right simulator?
Are you quoting something? Because that's actually the thread.
Is it really?
They're like, Mario only has a jump button and
no way.
forward and back. It has.
Here it is. It's made by Supersonic 1305. About as much as the average Mario game, running and jumping. So it's easy enough to comment on what these guys are saying, but I'm more interested in perhaps why they have these particular views. If there's anything in what they're saying that you can to point to that sort of aligns them with a particular kind of view, or perhaps what they're afraid of in some of these drastic responses.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I might say something here.
Yeah.
I feel that on page 2, the second post just after the ad by Ragnarok X, where in response to talking about Journey, he says that because gameplay is what defines the medium and should be held to a higher standard than Journey presents, I guess this guy perhaps would be more in, I would say, our camp, if that makes sense. So he's more into, gameplay, really.
Yeah. I think Journey made it onto one of my most disappointing games of the year list. And if you've read my review, I explained that it had so much going for it. It was so well made in so many ways. But then I think the thing that it tried to design around at its core, which is anonymous interactions between strangers, engendering senses or feelings of cooperativeness and all of that, like the social interaction aspect of Journey. I think the game really went in the wrong design direction by ignoring game design, by ignoring the history of what multiplayer games have done. They created a space where you pretty much have no choice but to play along and act cooperatively. And in a game system where you pretty much have very little choice but move forward and kind of spam jump to get the job done, they took away the expressivity and the unique ways that games reflect us through skillful gameplay, and instead they funneled everyone down what is essentially like a Disney World amusement park ride, and you're doing it side by side with a stranger, and then everyone comes out at the end going, this is the future of games, this is what games should be or what could be, and this is how it's so meaningful because I did it with a person. I'm like, yeah, the person was there, yeah, you kind of walk through the same obstacle course together, but there's so many meaningful interactions that didn't happen because they decided to sort of limit you in the way that they did, and that was probably the most disappointing part of the game. And I'm not even asking for like a Zelda dungeon, I'm not asking for quests or anything, but they could have designed even optional areas inside of Journey that allow some players to differentiate themselves via interesting gameplay choices. And I thought it would have been really cool to have a puzzle off to the side, and one guy's trying to solve it, and the other guy's like, this is taking too long. And they just kind of look at each other, and he's like, well, I like solving puzzles. And the other guy's like, I'm out. And like, wouldn't it be much more meaningful to be like, on my journey, I think this is meaningful because of what I like. And instead of just like, we don't have a choice, we're walking down the same hallway, we might as well stick together because there's nothing else to do in this game. Sort of design. I just thought just a touch of it here or there would have been great. And that's why ultimately the game disappointed me.
GD Justin, he's right under Ragnarok X. He talks about, and quotes some people about Journey being a truly magical experience. It's alluring and compelling, emotionally resonant. It's beautiful. Goes on to talk about how beautiful it's designed and the graphics. And I think that's what a lot of people, they don't care about gameplay. They're not interested in gameplay. They think gameplay is the sound and what happens and what it makes them feel and what it looks like in graphics. And there's all other sort of elements that are compelling in a game that aren't gameplay. And so I think I think people in general they don't know what gameplay is, and they just like to see something new and exciting and be part of it.
Yeah, it's so easy to like something new and shiny. It's just so easy. I like that one quote from the podcast where they was talking about their Game of the Year picks, and he's like, I give it to Journey, because that game ripped out my heart and held it in front of me, and it was like, feel these feelings you feel. And that quote exactly, I love it, because it really does speak to what Travis was just talking about. And in many ways, yeah, emotions are great, and I think a lot of what Journey conveys is done through its music and its visuals. Obviously not with its gameplay and interactivity way down on that list. But it was really easy for a lot of people to appreciate. It's just beautiful looking game, very good soundtrack. I used it on the ending of my second episode of Critical Cast, the Journey song, and it's just fantastic.
Right.
But the problem, like I said, I had was when the interactive meaning sort of conflicts or doesn't strongly support the thematic meaning that they went for, and they so strongly turned away from all that we've learned about games, and then what that says about game design and why people like it, that just sort of all gets swirled around in my head. I'm just like, I just can't sit here and support it.
Well, you must love Proteus then.
I met that guy at GDC last March.
Oh, yeah.
He talked to me about Proteus. I was like, oh, that's neat. And then I was like, what do you do? He's like, yeah, you don't do anything. I was like, oh. Now, it still could be cool. I really love Electroplankton. And that game is just artistic, playing around with sounds and just sort of experimenting on what the music you make improvisationally in the moment, messing with little fish icons. So, like I said in the podcast, I have nothing wrong with games that don't have gameplay, but the design of them still has to be very clear and good for what they are and what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
That reminds me, let's go to the next link on the list. I think I know exactly which one we should go to next. It's called We Are Explorers in Search of Mystery. Or maybe that one's too complicated. Let's do... that one's a huge article, but it has so much good stuff in it. Let's do Bad Story equals Bad Game. NeoGAF thread. I'm going to highlight it. Alright, yeah, it's highlighted there. So what we were just talking about was how other people can... Oh, Kaijima's screaming right now. What we were talking about is how video games are a really complex medium. And I like how I added that quote at the beginning of the Trigon, where it was Dan Pinchbeck. He's the creator of Dear Esther, which is basically a game where you walk around in first person in a 3D world, and you listen to audio tapes or diaries of a story about this character named Esther. And it's supposed to be very touching, heartfelt, something. I've never played it, but it's very much like Proteus. It's very much in a non-game, quote-unquote, category. But he got up there and he was like, video games are the best medium on the planet, and they're complicated, and we'll throw whatever we want at the gamer in order to get them to have an experience, whether it's AI, story, physics, whatever. Yeah. So very much in that vein, that very player-centric way of viewing things, where no matter what we do, as long as they're either paying for our games and enjoying them, that's the ultimate goal. We can better understand posts like this where they say bad story equals bad game.
Right.
And just take a moment to scan through some of these posts and see what you see. That's the third one from the top.
There are no good games.
That would mean almost every game is bad. And then you'll see further down by Rawhawk, bad music equals worst game.
Wow. God of War 1 came for the game, stayed for the story? Really? Is that? Okay, sure, whatever. Yeah, I don't...
Then on post 12, bad gameplay equals bad game. I really like that one.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you're like, are we talking about games, or are we talking about that sort of broader category of video games, which includes everything from Proteus to Journey to Walking Dead to Assassin's Creed to Smash Bros. Like every single thing that you can manipulate with a controller.
Yeah, I mean it's just such a blanket statement for something that has so many layers. I mean, that really it brings in what you think like the creative team behind it was setting out with. I mean, obviously Super Mario Brothers is not a bad game. You know, it's that's I don't know. This is tough. This is hard. Why are you making me think so much?
I think this all boils down to what you're looking for in a game. Like, boil down to the first YouTube video we watched about why women want to play games. They obviously want to play games for different reasons. Some people want to play games to build things. Some people want to play games to waste time. There's casual gamers. There's people that want to watch a video through a game. And there's people that want to, I don't know, see a story. And so I think if the reason for you wanting to play a game is to solve a puzzle, then that's the kind of game you want to choose. The people that want stories, that's everything to them. And so I can't really blame the person for making this post saying that if the story's bad, then the game is bad. But that's their personal preference in games.
Yeah, it's like I love Kingdom Hearts. Okay, like I do, and the more ridiculous the story got, the more I actually liked it. Like it got so just awful. Like I finally had to draw the line with the one on 3DS where it introduced time travel, and then I was like, no, that's the last thing you need to be doing right now. But I mean, it's not even like I liked it despite the crappy story. It was that it had it had a kitsch value to it. Like there was, I liked hearing all of their middle school philosophy and like the ridiculous stuff they throw at you. And I don't know. No, it really just boils down to what you're looking for and what makes the game feel complete. Like we don't need to know Mario's backstory. We don't need to, as we're playing Mario Galaxy, we don't need to uncover like audio tapes of Bowser's intentions and how his life as a child was tortured, and we don't need any of that in a Mario game, obviously. So what like games can stand alone, and they should be able to stand alone. But if a game's focus, like say, I don't really play Assassin's Creed, but there was all this build-up, and people were really excited to hear about what the end of 3 was going to be like. Mass Effect, too. It's like, if there's not going to be a satisfying conclusion to something that's very story-centric, then I can see how people would take a hit with that.
I think, did you notice in the thread how many people say that all video game stories suck?
Yeah.
Adamski. This is 99% of game stories are just complete garbage. And he's responding to somebody that says, but that would mean every game is bad. And if you scroll down, post 23, video games suck at telling stories because you got to jump all over and kill stuff every 2 seconds. Post 24, video games are for entertainment.
Oh, I hated that. I hated reading that.
Yeah, I feel that these comments are fueled by a lack of understanding as to what game stories are and how game stories work.
I was just about to mention some of the stuff you wrote about originally, that with the co-authorship and how gameplay and the juxtaposition between the interactive parts and the non-interactive story parts, how that works and how complicated that is, and that if you miss out on the gameplay parts, you miss out on a huge chunk of characterization and a huge chunk of the story if you don't see gameplay, if you're blind to it.
Yeah, exactly. I've expanded a bit on that in my book, so I guess you'll be happy to know that. I mean, I was thinking before I came on, because yesterday I watched David Cage's Dice Talk, which you linked to a bunch of them on Twitter, and geez, that guy does not like gameplay, I'll tell you that.
I have that link at the bottom. I was wondering if we were going to get to it.
Okay. Can I jump to that now?
Yeah, go ahead. The link at the very bottom of the list, it says David Cage offers 9 examples on how the industry can grow up.
Yeah. I think... because I linked this to my brother who had already seen it, and he's like, you know, like, well, I was surprised because he first agreed with me, which was great. But then the second part, which he said, is that, I wish Nintendo would make serious, mature games, because they've got the design part down pat, but they don't really make serious kind of thinking games. and I didn't know how to respond to him, because I don't think I can change his mind. But I think that when I think of game narrative, well, there are two examples I thought of which illustrate this point, right? So the first one is that game narrative needs to be based around what games are, and David Cage clearly does not accept that. I mean, he refuses to write games to write game stories that are based around interactivity. I think the opposite example of that is something like The Legend of Zelda, which if people knew more about this stuff, would be a cliched example of game narrative done right. And that is, the story of that game is the hero's story, the hero's tale, and how a boy becomes a man, and so on. And this is perfectly harmonious with interactivity and mastery and how that works. So as the player gets better at the game, Link develops as well, and there's this beautiful harmony between what the player does and what is the context, what is the story, which is laid on top of that. So and I think there are so many other. In fact, I would like to in the future write more about this. And that is, what ideas and concepts and stories are expressed in games. I mean, simple things, right? Like in Pac-Man. Pac-Man is about simple psychology, because in order to play Pac-Man, you need to understand the AI behaviors of the different ghosts, and each of the ghosts is based on a certain emotion or idea. So there's one that follows you so they get very close, and then they move away from you, so they kind of trick you in that way. There are others that move around randomly, some that move around in certain lines, and each of these simple AIs represent simple psychological concepts. So but this kind of this way of thinking about narrative through interaction is really discussed by the critical games.
Yeah, or like BioShock is a great example of that too. Like I mean, and that lends itself well to games that are about like enhancing your character and any sort of RPG elements that they just lend themselves so well to being able to follow a narrative that mirrors the gameplay itself.
Yeah, certainly. I also think, along with that, there are other aspects to game narrative beyond this part. Even though interactivity, education, learning is a key part of games, there are other ways to convey narrative, such as in the Metroid games, where narrative is conveyed through the environment, and the way that the environment embeds challenges and ideas and the flora and fauna of the area. I mean, these are all other examples of narrative in games.
Is anyone looking at the David Cage NeoGAF post and the 9 points that he wrote?
Yeah.
And I think there are a whole bunch of older game designers and games people that express this sentiment in various ways, but they all pretty much say the same thing. They think, remember the part in the Trigon podcast where I'm like, if you think games can be so much more, quote unquote, and if you're really like yearning for games to be more meaningful in these other ways, then perhaps you're missing out on the gameplay part. Like, look at what David Cage says, and as Daniel alluded to, or as Daniel just said, he doesn't really support gameplay and the meaning that is conveyed through gameplay. So, like I said, if you're missing out on a huge chunk of meaning, perhaps it's the gameplay part.
Yeah.
And so many adults just want video games to be literally set in a very ordinary, mundane, real setting with psychological real characters in ordinary life dramas, and they think that's like the thing that we're missing out of our games. They want to see a real house with a realistic looking person, good graphics, just like they do on TV, so that they can somehow begin to relate to characters and situations. And I'm like, I relate to characters and situations even when they're abstract.
Yeah, that's
you just put a block on the screen, I'm there, and if you put a challenge there, I'm like, interesting. Block challenge, like perhaps its interaction means something. And maybe my interpretation of it isn't consistent, but the more concrete you make the forms on the screen, the more I'm going to closer align my interpretations with some of the ideas that the game is trying to convey. And it's just so obvious to me that there's a group of people that read a certain kind of books, watch a certain kind of movies, and just kind of want games to be that instead of trying to understand how games get there in a very different way.
And it's so unfortunate because video games had the advantage of being born out of the abstract. Like video games have always been abstract, and then somewhere along the lines people decided that, oh, well, what these need to be is more realistic, when we should be embracing the abstract nature of it and finding ways to explore that. I mean, there are other mediums that can explore realism just fine.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that you mentioned embrace the abstract. That's almost the exact title of an article.
Oh, yeah.
Embrace the abstraction. And I'm like, people need to embrace the abstraction. It's very important because that's how people create interesting views and lenses to which to view the world and to reflect their understanding, yada, yada.
To link this back to the Trigon idea, I guess, where Victor says that games were born in the abstract, that comes from the technological side of the Trigon theory, where
very true.
Yeah, totally.
Where
bringing it full circle. Yeah.
Turn the camera on.
Because games are tied to systems, and the technology back then wasn't as good, so all games were abstract. I do agree with David Cage, where he says that games do need to have different contexts and settings, and I would actually disagree somewhat with what you've said, Richard, which is about games being set in ordinary life. I think that there are very few games that explore ordinary life, and I think that would be something really interesting, actually, because there are very few games that are about that. I mean, there's too much high fantasy, science fiction.
So I completely agree with you there. But what I wanted to say was, I think these guys are waiting for a game or a group of games to be like that before they think they can start appreciating it. When I'm saying games reflect these wonderful meanings already, and if we get a game that's set in real life, that'd be great. I'm even making a few, or jotting down notes and ideas for stuff like that. But
I think it's an important part of it, but I don't think it should be held up as like this is what is best, and
this is what we need to aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this goes to the storytelling narrative stuff that we were saying before, for me, the way that I see game narrative is through two things: context, which is the setting of the game, and that that defines large chunks of what the player does, their motivations. It sets up the world, and then you have interaction set in context, which is Mario jumps on a Goomba, so that's the function, and then you have Mario is a plumber, the Goomba is a small creature. So I think Cage is talking more about the setting and the context, and these things, as we're saying, are very different from the gameplay itself. I mean, you could have a game with one. I mean, really, he's just saying take all these shooting games and put them in the suburbs, or put them or put them somewhere else. And I think that doesn't really mean much to interactivity.
In light of what we just said, click on the link that says Miyamoto needs to take a back seat somewhere. It's that same Rawhawk guy that I mentioned before, but I think the Rawhawk guy said bad music equals bad game, I think that was what he said, but he made this thread here. And he quotes a few things Miyamoto said. I'll read them. Does Donkey Kong Country really need Kremlings? Does Super Mario Galaxy really need lore of any kind? Does Sticker Star, a game from a story character-driven series, really need any story/characters? And he gets really mad at Miyamoto.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
He gets pretty mad at Miyamoto. Where's my favorite line? I'm going to search for the word toxic. There we go. I don't know if I can stand seeing another one of my beloved franchises harpooned by Miyamoto's toxic gameplay first philosophies.
That was a tragedy.
Oh my god! Oh my god!
My favorite part about this post is he's very honest about what he likes and what he wants out of video games. Like we were saying before, some people just don't either like gameplay or see it or understand it as a very meaningful thing. So we get very honest responses from people like Rawhawk being like, why are you taking out the lore and the story and the characters? Because that's what I really like about games, and I can't stand this guy who is focused on something else. And I think for that honesty, this is completely worth talking about.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I like it how gameplay is toxic. Who does Miyamoto think he is? Somebody replies, one of the most talented game directors ever.
Yeah. No, I think that these types of posts are indicative of just how confused the dialogue is around games and what games should be and how.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when we don't have the language to clearly articulate what we like or how games can satisfy certain things, everyone just sort of feels like their side's being threatened.
Yeah.
And then they can't even explain how to preserve or to value what they like in games. And they use these huge generalities like toxic gameplay first philosophies.
Yeah.
And whether or not the gameplay first kind of ideas enhances the stories that he likes or not, he didn't quite express that, but he just knows that there's something that he likes about games, and he feels like there's people actively working against him.
Yeah, I feel it's quite unfortunate that these types of arguments are gaining acknowledgement or even traction.
Yeah.
Because this reminds me of a post which I read, and I think we maybe talked about before, Richard, which is this long post by, I don't know who it was now, but about Zelda Skyward Sword and how this guy wants Zelda to be like Dark Souls and to be very difficult and obscure and archaic and all these other things. It's yeah. And then there's the whole the games blogosphere, which value the stuff that I mentioned before, the narrative and the contextual elements, but they don't actually have a respect for gameplay. Yeah, it's quite sad.
I was just about to talk about that.
Oh, go ahead. Can everybody hear it?
There's a group of people whose problem with Zelda games is that they're games first and they're an adventure built off of a game. So when people lament about dungeon items and bosses that require dungeon items and MacGuffins that make you go out and play the game, the game is a game first. It's kind of like complaining about stars in a 3D Mario game.
Yeah.
Like, that's how they get you out there to do the interesting things.
Yeah.
The same people who complain about not getting an awesome weapon for exploring a cave in Zelda. I remember hearing that for the first time and going, it's fun to explore the cave in Zelda. That's your reward.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a randomly generated gray cave. So they'd have to appease you by giving you a +5 axe with a fire attribute. It's fun to explore the cave in Zelda. That's what's fun about Zelda.
Yeah, I think this also ties into the intrinsic motivators that we said before.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, I think that tying into the stuff on David Cage as well as what you've just said, Marcus, I think that perhaps there needs to be a term for games which are the opposite of game, which don't have and don't respect gameplay, or that.
Or just, not primarily.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't say don't respect gameplay. They're going to piss some people off.
Yeah. Because I think this thing, it runs on a spectrum, right? So maybe at one end we have Super Mario Brothers, and at the other we have something like Heavy Rain or Journey or the new Tomb Raider. Oh, God.
That looks like it has some gameplay. Like, you do stuff in that game, even though...
Uncharted.
Oh, God, yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Uncharted's still a game. You can't lose me now, guys.
Burn it down. Burn it all down.
I'm not saying it's on the far right of the spectrum, just that it's, it's chilling out over there in that other area.
No, actually, this goes back to the David Cage thing as well, where he says that we need to get away from competition and systems, two things which he actually confuses in his talk. So he says this, but he doesn't quite get the fact that Heavy Rain has a system to it. Although it's very pared back, it still has a system, and no matter how hard he tries, if he wants to make games, they have to have systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you remember the quote from the podcast where I had it? The guys were talking about Mass Effect 3 and how right when the game came out, he was disappointed to see that people were immediately going to forums and figuring out how to spec their character out or play to Paragon, Renegade, whatever, and they called it quote-unquote gaming the system, and they were immediately trying to do that.
Mm.
And that reminds me of what Daniel just said, that people often confuse playing games and embracing systems with this negative light where they think they're somehow going against the meaning and the value of the work.
Right.
And I have this little quick test that I invented to figure out if you are, or what you're saying is a games as art view or otherwise. And if you replace the game that you're talking about in the sentence with a piano, which is a musical instrument that's highly skill-based and the more work you put into learning the piano, the more you'll get out of it, very much like a video game. If you replace the word with piano and then you say that sentence to yourself, if it sounds ridiculous, then that means you are not on the games as art side. So if I gave you a new piano piece and you instantly ran to a forum and looked up fingering for how to play the runs better, and you looked up the chord structure and you're just really trying to get down into the structure of the music, would I look at you and go, quit trying to music the music, quit trying to game the music? And you're like, no, I'm trying to learn the music. I'm trying to embrace what it is. I'm trying to interact with the structures and the limitations that it puts forth.
Right.
And I'm trying to engage with what it is so I can produce some wonderful music down the line by adhering to these structures. So it's a little quick test you can use on your friends.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
And some people are like, why do I have to play this level over? Why do I have to restart this song from the beginning when I messed up the middle? Because you messed up the middle. Would you like to play the song clearly? Then clearly you need to start back from the beginning, or at least a little bit further back. No, I'll just mess my way through it, and that's not music.
Yeah.
Are you here to make music, or what are you here for? The story. Yeah, music doesn't have stories.
I think as far as gameplay, I think we're still at the beginning stages of video games. Video games have been around since the 80s when computers and Pong and all that stuff started coming out, and it's still a relatively new media form, and we're now just barely pushing the limits of our hardware to the extremes. That's what everybody was trying to do, like, how can I make my car look just like a photograph, and pushing realism to the most extreme, where Nintendo did follow that stream for a while, and then after a while you can see, like with GameCube and the Wii and then Wii U, they're not necessarily focusing on the best graphics. They do have great graphics, but I think the whole industry's got to mature and realize, all right, now that we've gotten to the point that we can make everything look like a photograph, that we can make everything look precisely real, like exactly like real life, now what? Now what kind of games can we make? Now what kind of gameplay can we have? And I think people are just beginning to ask those questions because people were just waiting to see if we could get to this point. It's sci-fi. It's what we all dreamed about when we were kids. Like, what if it was just like real life? We all thought that. And now we're here. Now we got to figure out what to do with it.
And
It sounds like the technology view right there. where
Yeah.
You're just kind of running along with the increased power and the increased hardware, and at some point you reach a saturation point, like what you were describing.
You got to figure out what the gameplay is at that point. Like, oh, how do I make this fun now again?
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that in the indie game scene, and that's where embracing the abstract comes in, and it reflects like art movements since the dawn of human history. It's like why did impressionist painters come about? It's a response to rejecting realism and abstract painting and postmodernism. Those are all reactions to being bored of just trying to make everything look like people think it should look, you know?
And along those lines, we have a really complicated case here where you can look at a lot of history of film and literature and visual arts, and you can see these trends and reactions. But in many ways, those mediums were very focused on one thing. And like films do storytelling, and the visual arts do visual representation. The music has its own abstract way of delivering ideas, but they're very much focused on those. And I think because video games is the newest medium, and that they're so complex and they can absorb all these other sub-media, that you really don't have a single direction that they're moving, so that you won't see as clear responses coming from the industry as a whole. I think that was one of the things I wanted to express about the Trigon view. You have people moving in a very technology-oriented way, people moving in a very gamers-first kind of way, and then other people trying to push the gameplay and art side. And you're not going to get a whole bunch of people who are like, oh man, I'm tired of technology now. Let me just do a reaction and see what this gameplay stuff's all about.
Right.
I wrote in the article, like, those individual views of games are inexhaustible. You're going to get people drilling down into those forever, and there's not going to be a backlash. And then when you get a gaming product that combines and satisfies these views in one way or another, whether or not there's give and take in the design, that just complicates the issue. It makes it even harder to compare, harder to see the intersection between these parts, and harder to understand what's exactly shaping that end experience, especially when there's so many options, so much variability in these games that are getting so large. I don't think you're going to see clear trends and backlashes like you do in other mediums. I think video games are a lot different. Pretty good place to leave off if anybody has any closing comments.
Nothing here. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah,
no problem.
No, thank you very much. That was great. I'm satisfied.
Anybody else want to plug anything before we go?
Barbari Ball will be available for PSN
this fall. And your podcast, Victor?
Check out the 8 Bits of Destiny podcast. We're just starting up. It's a companion podcast that goes along with a biannual video game art show that we put on.
Cool.
The next one is going to be at the Vancouver Retro Gaming Expo in June. So if you like cool things like that, check it out. You can follow me on Twitter at Carrick_CN, I think. KARRICK_CN. So, yeah. And thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, guys, for coming. See you next
Sweet.
time.
later.
Bye-bye.
See you, Richard. And everyone else as well.
Bye-bye.
And that is it for the B-side of Critical Cast Episode 3 Trigon. I'm Richard Terrell, otherwise known as KirbyKid, and you can find out more about my show and what I do in the game space over at criticalgaming.com. That is critical-gaming.com. And there in the show notes, you'll find links to everything that we discussed in the show. I have a Twitter page. It's at KirbyKid, all one word, and a Facebook page and a YouTube channel that could use your support. So if you're listening to this part of the show right now, that means you really like something to stick around to the end. I want to give a special thanks to Matt Fairchild and Alex Cho Snyder for being part of the interview segment at the beginning, and I also want to acknowledge Brandy Grace and NeoGaf for use of their material in the discussion part. As far as music goes, there's Game Over Yeah, music from a lot of the indie games that we discussed, including Fly Drill, The Love Letter, and Cannibalt. And then there is a music taken from a bunch of Tiny Code trailers that you can find on YouTube, and also music from Ikaruga, Sonic and the Secret Rings, and you're listening right now to Zelda Skyward Sword's menu theme. Episode 4 of Critical Cast is all about skill competition in the competitive world of Super Smash Bros. It's the story of my pro gaming career and how I got the name KirbyKid. You don't want to miss it. See you next time, guys. Oh, and just because Victor gave me the idea, we were gaming along on Gamer